Okay. So Tommy's first talk was about AI in games. The second talk by Pete there was about procedural generation. Very appropriate that we now talk about death in roguelikes. I'm talking about alternative death systems here. For those who don't know me, I'm Darren Grey. My Twitter name is dgrey0, and you can find a bunch of my games on gamesofgrey.com. If you really like the sound of my voice, you can listen to me a lot on Roguelike Radio.com. I gave a talk at the last time the IRDC was in the UK on what I call the single hit point model, which was replacing HP in games with just one hit kills. And since I've given that talk, I've seen a lot more of this sort of game, which I attribute entirely down to myself. Now I want people to go further and think more about the entire way they kill players, which is a very important part of roguelikes, how people die. Oh, come on. My magic wand isn't working, so I will move over here and press button. I should also note that I've recently upgraded PowerPoint to a really fancy version with different slide transitions. You'll get to see a lot of them, they're really cool. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of death in roguelikes, which most people should find pretty obvious. The HP model, which is fairly ubiquitous, not just in roguelikes, but in a wide range of games. A few of my own experiments over the past few years. What other games are doing, a few other sort of interesting examples. The importance of near-death experiences, and then finally what I think are the features of a good death system. Watch this. It turns into a little origami bird that flies away. Right, so the role of death in roguelikes should be reasonably obvious. It is the ultimate consequence of failure. It is the ultimate punishment for when you are doing things wrong. It is when you make the wrong choices, it leads ultimately to death. You can have many other things like loss of resources and so on throughout the game, but death is the end. If you go too far, if you play too sloppily, if you are simply not playing good enough. And that's very important. It adds tension to the game because you are aware that your choices really matter, and that, of course, leads to the fun of roguelikes. And certainly we all enjoy being punished for our mistakes. That's a great thing. There's also a big role-playing element to it in roguelikes. Death is, this isn't just failure, this is your character has died. And there's an impact to that, there's a kind of a thematic element to that, and that's very important. And of course, in the sphere of roguelikes, it enforces learning. It makes sure that you actually know, that you learn from your mistakes. You know that if you don't learn, you're going to die again. I am, of course, talking about permadeath in general here. We did do a Roguelike Radio episode 3 years ago on permadeath, if you want to check that out. Now, the HP model, no, just wrong for that. Right. Some games experiment with not having death, or at least not having death be the end, or play around with death in some way. Princess RL, death doesn't actually exist in the game. You fall unconscious and then you get pulled away, and actually the consequence of failure in that sense is a kind of a time resource hit or a character development hit in the game. In Tales of Magial, you get extra chances through a live system built into the game. Felix in DCSS has a similar sort of thing. Dungeon Lands gives a kind of progression across games with a whole academy feature. And Roguelikes, at the more extreme end, actually has death as a kind of progression mechanic. Death of the character is not the death of the game. Death is in a very different role. I'm not too interested in these. To me, these aren't really fun. When I played Princess RL, I had to quit my character every time I died because it just wasn't compelling to me not to do that. In Tales of Magial, I play in roguelike mode because one life is what I want. Don't give me anything else. I personally don't find it the same. Even I struggle to play other types of games. I play Skyrim. Something kills me, and I'm like, well, I don't really want to play that character anymore. I've just seen this person I'm supposed to be role-playing fall over and die, and I'm supposed to just get back up and play. No, it doesn't work for me. So there is a whole interesting thing on this area. doesn't interest me. Especially these sorts of things are very good for new players to the genre, getting them into making it more accessible to people that can't cope with death that easily. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this thing, the HP model, which is just everywhere. We have hit points or health systems and everything. Call of Duty, Skyrim, Roguelikes, everything, they all have this sort of HP model. You have a number, and your number is your life. You get your arm chopped off, you just have a smaller number. There are some significant pros to this system. It is very well known. Because it's ubiquitous, you don't need to teach people how health works. You don't need to teach people how health recovery works. It's easy enough to implement. Give your character a number, make numbers go up and down. Very simple thing to that. It is granular, so you can have different stages. You can have different attacks from enemies, cause different levels of damage. It's very simple. The cons, in roguelikes in particular, we have this scaling numbers problem. A character starts off with 5 HP, by the end of the game they have 5,000, or something similar. And it becomes ludicrous, becomes meaningless numbers. So the HP system, I think, in particular in a lot of the larger roguelikes, loses its meaning, loses its impact. You have this death by many cuts. Now this can be a good thing. It depends what you want from your game. But in a game which is about kind of tactical combat, moment-to-moment decisions, I feel like it's kind of wrong for a player to die because actually 100 turns ago they were making some bad decisions. Or they were making bad decisions over the course of a longer term of play, rather than it was this point at which I made the wrong decision that got me killed. Anyone who's played FTL will know that it's long-term bad play that kills you rather than short-term bad play in that game. So if you want people to ascribe meaning to how they die, HP is a bad system unless you have very, very small HP amounts, something like Hotline. Although I would say that games that have very small amounts of HP like Hotline end up with players acting like they only have 1 hit point. Because that is the optimal play, and that's kind of, you've got small HP as a buffer zone only, rather than treating HP as a resource that you can trade for a certain advantage at certain points. You can feel too safe with hit points, which I think is a big problem. You're smashing around with 500 hit points, you've got some really cool equipment, holds lots of numbers on it, and you don't really feel like anything's going to kill you. You know nothing will kill you in 1 hit, or at the very least you hope not. And you've got a bunch of HP potions in your backpack. It's not a problem. So I feel like in a roguelike you should always be worried that death is going to come for you. And if you have a hit point system with lots of hit points, you lose that feeling. Balance with hit points is very difficult if you have any sort of HP recovery mechanism. If players can hoard potions, it's really difficult for you to balance your game around that, for you to be able to threaten the player without punishing people that haven't hoarded, and making people that have hoarded just feel like, no, that's not a problem. So it's not very tight design-wise, I think. And in a lot of roguelikes, we ignore these anyway with these insta-deaths. Fall in water, you're dead. Fall in lava, you're dead. Land on spikes, you're dead. These sorts of eat the wrong corpse, you're dead. NetHack is full of them, lots of games are full of them. We have this HP system, and then we have all these ways of just circumventing that anyway. And the players generally find this to be a horrible, horrible system. But more than that, I think it's boring. It's a number. And it leads to boring design. It leads to, how do I make this enemy more interesting? I will make it hit you with a bigger number. That's not fun. That's not fun. So let's crumple that up and throw it away. So, I have made a bunch of experimental assembly roguelikes mostly, playing with this little act course, seeing what ways I can fiddle with it in interesting ways. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a few of the things I have done. My first ever game, slowly, was gruesome. And it's a game we play as a group. It uses what I call the one hit point model, as in you will die in one hit, except it doesn't have the usual kind of collision hit mechanism of death. Instead, you are a little black square somewhere, just there. And the enemies have cones of light that they're torches, basically. And if the light hits you, then you die. And this is kind of interesting that you have zones of death. You have no-go areas, but they're moving, and they're based around the enemies of the game that you want to kill or avoid. And so they're kind of the mobile zones of death that you need to consider the geometry of that change from turn to turn. There are some problems with this system. It's easy to walk around a corner and just get hit and killed. This isn't always such a good thing, but it does make the player consider their environments, think ahead, that sort of thing. In terms of actually killing enemies, because death obviously is a mechanic, for progression in games. We normally have inflicting death be the method of progression. You cannot attack enemies directly in this game. You need to either disable them first to try and get them to move on to you. You get bonus points if you get enemies to just stumble onto you, which is very difficult because they're obviously holding torches, and if you want to go near them whilst they have the torches on, it's all very risky. So there's a nice kind of risk-reward element to that, tying in both their method of killing with your method of killing. A more traditional style of roguelike in certain ways is probably the Trapper. Again, one-hit kills in this, but it is through bump attacks, which is quite the traditional roguelike mechanic. You are a little axe symbol, and if the enemies bump into you, they kill you instantly. You can't kill them straight away. You can only kill them with traps that you lay about, so it's kind of like you have to move around to be able to kill them. You need to make them aware of you, which is instantly putting you closer to death by making them aware of you, and then lead them into the traps that you've laid. This again suffers from kind of one-hit kill. There's no buffer to it. I say suffers in that the big problem is that you can just make a mistake. People make mistakes when playing games. Make a mistake, fudge the controls, and you will die. So this is not necessarily good for people that don't want this intense, always having to pay attention while dying kind of play. So another game I made was called Mosaic, which is kind of laying tiles like this. I love these animations. What I did in this was a two-stage death. You have these coloured tiles. If you're on a coloured tile, you're probably safe. If you're on a grey tile, you're one stage away from death. Enemies change the tile mechanics. They will first change a coloured tile into a grey tile, and then change a grey tile into an empty space. If an enemy does both to you, then you'll end up dead. This is kind of interesting that it's two-stage, and you know when you're on a grey tile, you're in a dangerous position. Whilst if you're on a coloured tile, you're probably safe, although you do still need to be aware of multiple enemies acting at once. The problem with it in this game is that it's actually a bit too easy. It's too easy to stay safe in this game. Staying in the coloured tiles, keep making more coloured tiles. Death doesn't come until you're actually supremely overwhelmed, and when you get into a completely unescapable situation. When death is nearing, it's just too late. You don't really have a way of reacting, because if you're that close to death, you're kind of in a black hole of difficulty. What's more interesting, I think, about this game is how you kill enemies. You inflict death by surrounding enemies with coloured tiles. You move around. As you move around the map, you lay down coloured tiles everywhere you step. And you have ways of making multiple tiles at once. If you create a square, the whole square fills up with colour in it, and any enemies trapped in that area die straight away. And this is interesting. It leads to a very different sort of gameplay than many roguelikes. I think there's more experiments that we've done with attacks that aren't just bump to kill or press an ability button or a spell button to kill an enemy in a certain way. If we look at how we can manipulate enemies, manipulate the environment, there's ways to inflict death with this in new and interesting ways. But I wasn't too happy with that as a death system. So the next few games were text-based. And in particular, Data Queen here was inspired by the board game Hive. Hive, for those who haven't played it, is a two-player chess-like game. And the aim of the game is to surround your opponent's queen. If you have the queen entirely surrounded by your own or their units, it just has to be surrounded, doesn't matter whose units it is, then that person loses. I thought this would be really interesting, a roguelike. And yeah, I think it is actually. So you play this character as a queen bee character. The theme of it is a bit weird. It's insects plus cyberpunk, I guess. But the enemies are all reasonably easy. Killing them's relatively easy. You have a kind of range of abilities you can use on them. But if they surround you, you die. And to kill enemies, obviously you need to get close to them. If you want to kill many of them at once, you need to get close to many at once. And several of the bosses use kind of multiplying and summoning techniques and so on to make this really tricky for you. I did this again this year with my 7-day roguelike Firetail, where if you get surrounded by ice, which is a terrain type in the game, or by ice monsters, which is all of the enemies, you will die. And this again, somewhat interesting because it does have a kind of gradated health system, as in, you don't just die in a single hit. You die if you get surrounded. You can see when you're getting surrounded, but sometimes, for tactical reasons, you need to put yourself into those situations of risk. If an enemy is summoning monsters around itself and you need to kill that enemy, you have no choice but to wade in closer and closer to that enemy to kill it, even though it means ignoring these summoned monsters that are surrounding you more and more. It also means, from a design perspective, I get warned the players that they're getting close to death. If they're surrounded by 4 enemies, or 4 pieces of ice terrain or whatever, I can put a shader across the level, which kind of gets bluer and bluer the more surrounded they are. So there's a real representation there. You are really close to death here, beware. And having the ability to flag that is very important. Let's do my own experiments. In other games, some of them have value, some of them don't. This is the perils of using 3D instead of ASCII. So there's a lot of other games. I'm just going to go through a couple of examples that I find thought-provoking. Hyper Rogue uses single hit point death, but it has a kind of it doesn't let you make a suicidal move. In this position, if you play here, there's an enemy there. If you have to move next to here, next to the enemy, it'll kill you in one hit. Because you move, then the enemies move. The game doesn't let you do that. So you can move there, but you cannot move here. You cannot move to this space, that will get you killed. It's a bit like in chess, you can't move your king into a checkmate position, or if you get in a check position, you have to move out of it. So the only way you die in this is when, again, you get overwhelmed. So 5 minutes. Okay. Another game is Oro, where you die if you get pushed off the edge of the terrain area. This is interesting because you kill enemies by the same way, so you end up in this kind of constant struggle at the edge of terrain types, trying to take advantage of the geometry for your own means whilst not suffering from what the enemy does. Nightfall is another system where you have this constant wave of night approaching. If you get stuck in the night, you will die. The enemies that you encounter throughout the terrain aren't that hard, but they slow you down. And this is interesting because you see death coming. I think that's very important, to be able to kind of make players aware of death and when they're close to death. Sonic, I think, is kind of interesting in that you have these rings that you collect. As long as you have rings, you won't die in one hit, apart from certain situations. Every time you get hit, you lose your rings, but you get the ability to pick up a few more. And it has this way of kind of, if you're clever, you can always try and cling on a little bit. And it's only again when you get overwhelmed by something really hard that overcomes your abilities, that you then suffer death. And I think that's something that can maybe be explored. Now, near-death experiences are when you're close to death. You need to make some decisions. ADOM has this interesting system called True Berserking. If you take off all your clothes and switch to a very aggressive stance, you'll do a lot more damage. I'm not explaining why this works in the game. This is a comic someone drew to try and explain what actually happens in this. It's interesting because you are in a tricky situation, you realise you can't survive with your current tactics, so you make this very dramatic decision to reduce your defence and attack the enemy like that. I think that's a really kind of a cool way of making the player kind of make these choices near death. Make choices that are dramatic and interesting. Tales of Magiala, something similar with Unstoppable Talent, which will put you at 1 HP, will put you in a kind of battle frenzy that lets you take down enemies more easily. Quickly skip on so I can wrap up. So, for a good death system, just a bit of video here. Do we have any like PG ratings? Yeah.
Anything around how gory is completely acceptable.
Okay. Glad you confirmed. So, a good death system encourages drama when near death, both when you survive death and when you fail to death. We have these systems best when it is clear that we are near to death. When death, we can see it coming, right? When it's not by accident, you don't just keep holding down the left key and, oh shit, I'm died because there's an enemy I didn't see. When the player feels they have choices in these situations, where death, if they can see coming, and they know there are things that they can do to either avoid it or if they make the wrong choice, they'll end up like Sean Bean. And if you have those things, then the player knows it was his fault or her fault when they died. And that is very important for establishing the lessons and for all the reasons that we have death in roguelikes. Making it the player's fault is absolutely paramount. And drama. Like this. Where you're falling off a cliff, the cow's falling on top of you. This is drama. And this is very important in roguelikes, that we have death be this dramatic, memorable thing, where there were choices, where there was a story in your head of what you did and what you were thinking, and you have a kind of interesting outcome from that. And that is the death of this presentation. Thank you. Have we got time for questions?
Yes, we have 2 to 3 minutes.
All right.
Hi Darren.
Hello.
It's sort of a little side change from this. Are there many systems that have changed the world based on your death? I know this is just a one-hit death of the dead, that's it, it's over. But like
so is there stuff that makes a difference to the game so that when you're playing in future?
Yeah.
I mean, Rogue Legacy is an obvious example, where your next character is based on the character that just died. NetHack has ghost files in it, so that your character will actually appear in future games. If you have a powerful character dying on an early level, you think, oh crap, I'll run into that character again sometime. And there are other games which have some sort of persistency of death unlocks and upgrades and extra items and so on. Just to change them.
Sharing the Wanderer
Sharing the Wanderer.
story, every time you buy it advances the story.
Yeah, so there's a kind of narrative progression over death in Sharing the Wanderer. So there's been a lot of experiments with this. I think it's an interesting area for experimenting more.
Because if there's a cost for your future playthroughs, then it does make your decisions in your current one slightly different, I guess. Like you say, if you die on the first level, you've got a powerful guy, that's very different from...
Yeah. So if there's a cost, I think that's actually probably bad if there's a cost to the player, because it means that they don't want to play their game when they're drunk. Because it's going to screw up future things. So I think that's actually a bad thing to have. If there's a cost, like a meta game cost from death.
Yeah, you could, but then some people love playing Eve, and that's like the example of those costs being about as heavy as you can get. People like that sense of risk. So I guess for some people it might be really nice.
Yeah, for some people it might be something that they like. Any other questions?
I've seen a number of systems recently on both Netflix with some pseudo roguelikes where you have some degree of hit point bar. They protect you from instant kill to make sure you pay attention to what's going on. When you get taken below 0 hit points for the first time, you're like on death watch, and another blow will kill you. Any comments on those kind of systems?
Yeah, so the game I made was a sort of similar thing. You get put onto this kind of what you would call like a death watch thing. You're one further hit away from death. The problem is to make sure that it's not a case of, well, if you took that hit that gets you close to death, then you're probably in a screwed up situation anyway. So it's good in a kind of like a soft buffer, like a little bit of a buffer, have this sort of system, but yeah, you have to be careful if the player still has choices upon that situation. I think one thing that's good actually is if in that situation they suddenly get extra powers. They've got some like super thing that comes out, and they might even make the decision to go into that death watch mode because they know it might give them the power to get out of this situation. I think that's the sort of interesting decision making that would be good to have. I'll probably wrap it up there. Thank you very much.